On today's episode of Youth Inc., we are joined by Tom Farrey. Tom is the executive director of the Aspen Institute's Sports and Society program, which aims to create solutions that can help sports serve the public interest. Tom gives insights on how America stacks up against other countries in youth sports participation and accessibility. We also discuss the commercialization of sport, what we can do to fix our model, and more. Whether you're an athlete ready to push your limits, a parent looking to support your child, or a coach helping to guide the way, this episode has the insights you need. Join us as we break down the next steps to building the best youth sports experience for our young athletes.
So Tom, why did you dedicate so much of your professional time and all of your intellect prowess to youth sport?
Yeah, look, I was an ESPN reporter for 20 years, investigative reporter, outside lines, E60, this kind of thing. And for a long time, I basically put people on the hot seat and, use critical thinking to lay out the problems of sport in our society. And I kind of got to the point where I wanted to help solve them. And the problem that I wanted to solve, first and foremost, is the one I saw right in front of me. I was raising kids, 3 kids, boy, girl, boy. And my kid was playing, I remember, he's like 6 years old, or my daughter was 6 years old, and she was playing on a team with girls who were in their 9th season of soccer at that point, because they've been playing 3 seasons a year since age 4, right?
Greg and I just looked at it.
I was doing the math. I was like, wait.
How does this work?
Are they time traveling?
Yeah. No, 3 seasons a year. I mean,
if you're not playing 3 seasons of soccer, you're not committed, Mike.
You are falling behind.
You gotta get with it.
And now it's 4 seasons a year, a year for these kids. So I'm like, whoa, how did this happen? Because I played sports as a kid. I played organized sports. And I think I slipped on a uniform for the first time when I was 7 or 8 years old. And even after, I played a variety of sports, but even after that, much of my childhood was unstructured free play, making up games with my friends down at the park, hopping on my bike, coming back at sunset. A lot of us, had this kind of experience. I'm like, how did this happen? Just in one generation, we went from that to this. And so I just went down this hard rabbit hole and talked to a lot of people, tried to understand how our sport ecosystem got built the way it did. I looked at the policies, the practices, the partnerships, the key institutions. I traveled to 6 or 7 countries and said, okay, how is their sport system set up? And I'm like, wow. All right, now I know all this stuff. And I did the lecture tour, and people would say, well, thank you for telling us how we got into this mess. Now, how do we get out of it? Right. And that's when my interest shifted from breaking down the problem to working with the Aspen Institute and creating these roundtables and having the fortune to talk to guys like you about how do we fix this. And once you have that opportunity, it's a very hard thing to walk away from.
So how did we get into it? So give us the Cliff Notes version of what that speaking circuit looked like when you were informing all these policymakers and everyone's like, hey, in one generation, here's how we went from what you described that we all kind of grew up in to now what my kids are going through, which is vastly different. What is the Cliff Notes version? How did we end up in this spot where commercialization and privatization of youth sports is now entering into elementary school?
Yeah. Well, there's no one cause, of course. Things are complex. We're talking about an entire system here. But a couple big things that happened were Title IX became enforced. So Title IX was signed into law in 1972, but really wasn't enforced until the mid to late 80s. Once it was enforced, then schools had to create opportunities for girls playing sports. So it began to push more kids into the space, and it got parents thinking, particularly on the girls' side, about college scholarships, the thing that could, the payoff down the road, number one. Number two, ESPN or Disney created the Wide World of Sports out of Orlando. That was the first megacity. That is what opened the door to all of this youth sports tourism. And people are like, whoa, there's a lot of money rolling through the idea.
I never even thought about
Disney.
That.
Yeah. And now we got these megacilities.
They're everywhere.
Everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. So those are 2 big reasons.
Interesting. So that's where the commercialization and saying, hey, youth sports no longer is just about the betterment and improvement and development of young kids. We can actually make a business model around that versus the traditional model, even when I was growing up, was Parks and Rec, church leagues, YMCA, PALs, Boys and Girls Clubs. It was all youth centers. They weren't necessarily private businesses running tournaments and events and camps and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, as the privatized recreation space began to mature, we had situations like the 2008, economic crisis, which gutted city budgets. So Park and Recs programs, the local low-cost programs.
That's where club would have.
So they got out of the programming business, and those fields were now rented out to the local clubs.
Right.
And so during that recession, and even during COVID, the travel club environment didn't slow down, but the privatized local low-cost stuff got hurt.
So with those three elements, and then you've got the race to nowhere. What's that phrase?
Just race to the bottom, I guess.
Race to the bottom is what I was looking for. And we've got a real intensity in the way that we compete with each other for attention in the modern world now. What would you give the grade for youth sport in America?
Well, we actually did give a grade. And I would base it upon, first and foremost, the participation rate. Last fall, we looked at the world's leading sports systems, looked at 12 countries and how they set up their sports system. We looked in several different categories. How well did they do at creating elite athletes or Olympic champions and this type of thing, number one. Number two, what is the level of government support? Funding and policies and structure. And the third thing is just the other real outcome, which is like how many kids are playing sports. And so in this country, it was, when we made that evaluation, it was about 51% according to the federal government. And so that merits a C grade. It might even be a C minus. I have to double check on that.
51% of the U.S. population
ages 6 to 17 play an organized sport in some form or another according to their parents.
And that's a C.
That correlates to a
What's
C.
an A? Like, what, when you looked at these 12 countries, what's at the top of the list? Like, what does great participation look like?
Norway. More than 90% of kids in Norway come through clubs, play sports. It's just baked into the way they have set up their ecosystem there. And by the way, they also create a lot of elite athletes.
They do for a small country.
They kill it in the Winter Olympics.
They kill Olympic athletes, right? That's kind of their
But even in the summer sports, I mean, Erling Haaland, I mean, some of the top soccer players in the world on the male and the female side are from Norway now.
Do a nice job in track and field.
We're Norwegian.
Oh,
no big deal.
There you go.
I'm Norwegian.
There you go.
Olsen with an E. Oh, it's Sweden. We'll get into that. We'll get into my lineage at another later date. But so yes, but it's hard for me to believe though in a country that just seems so sports crazy.
Right.
Whether it's just as fans and how popular our professional leagues are and college sports are and how we just consume live sports. I have to imagine it's up there with anywhere in the country, maybe aside from some of those soccer crazy nations and Mikey.
No, we're number one by far. We are the largest sports market in the world.
So how are we such a large sports market with a middle of the road, we'll call it C grade as far as participation? Doesn't interest in sport typically drive participation?
Yes. The data shows that a child who plays sports is 6.4 times, according to ESPN's research, 6.4 times more likely to become an avid fan of that sport. You know, the avid fan is what you chase, and that's the person who floats the entertainment.
It's why all the soccer MLS clubs all have those feeder like youth organizations. Like in Charlotte, when Charlotte FC made an expansion team to build the MLS team, the infrastructure and the investment into the youth soccer scene in Charlotte was quadrupled. Yeah. Because the idea is the more kids playing soccer, the more fans of soccer there are.
NFL
it's correlated.
The flag football.
NFL flag, yeah.
This feels corrupted to me though. This feels like it's the exact wrong reason why we would want youth sport and the wrong funding source for it. Yeah. And of the three measures, I didn't hear the fourth one, which is like a measure or an estimate of a measure of well-being, of sense of vigor, sense of vitality for a person. And so even what I would consider the most important variable to measure was not on that list. It was measured from, I don't know, some sort of economic impact as opposed to psychological.
Right.
It seems all economically driven, no?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons I hate to keep talking about Norway. It's a small country. You can't really, it's not apples to apples with the US. But they really get sport right at the base, so they end up creating the top athletes. But they also have among the healthiest and happiest nations in the world.
What do they do? Give us an idea of like what does the sports structure of youth sports look like in Norway?
Well, they weren't always good. That's the important thing. In the early 90s, they were not winning like they wanted to. So the leaders of sports, again, easier to do in a small country, they got back together and said, we need to kind of rebuild this thing. And one of the very first things they did was create a Children's Bill of Rights in Sports, which is a statement that every kid in our country should have an opportunity to play sports, to play with their friends, and should be able to develop as a human being and love of game. They explicitly put that in there. The goal of sport for kids should be love of game. Our job is to help kids fall in love with sport, and then that'll take care of itself. And then as kids move into the teenage years, then we're going to put them with the really good coaches and the sports scientists, and we're going to turn them into the champions that they want to be. But we're not going to try and do that when kids are 6 and 8 years old.
Is there a filtering process for that? Like when they get to that appropriate age, whatever they've declared in that athlete bill of rights, is there, when it gets to whatever that 15 years old, 16, whatever the cutoff is, who's deciding who gets filtered in with the good coaches, who gets filtered into the academies, who gets the top level training? Is all of that regulated?
First and foremost is the first filter is whether the child wants to do it.
Okay.
If the child wants to be that champion, it's not China. It's not China where exactly that's a
but that's real. I mean, I was being
worlds do
joke,
this just a little bit different.
The old Soviet Union. I mean, it was just you didn't have a choice. You were
right.
It was pre.
Right. We tend to conflate these countries, socialist, communist, but there's a significant difference in terms of how China has gone about their sports system and the Scandinavian countries have. And the Scandinavian country, all of it is like the Children's Bill of Rights in Sport. It was all voted on by the national governing bodies, by the Olympic Committee, by representatives from the states. So they create a consensus around what they want sport to be. And then they put the policies in place to support it. It's not cherry picking a 4 and a 5 and a 10-year-old to get into. Something called the Confederation of Sport.
Is that like a bureaucracy? Is that an element of the federal government?
Yep. So you got like the Olympic Committee, you've got their national governing bodies, you've got the states, and sitting on top of that is something called the Confederation. It reports into the actual government. We don't have a structure like that here in the U.S.
No.
We have the Olympic Committee, which has been basically told by Congress, you need to be kind of our sports ministry. We've kind of outsourced it to the USOPC.
And it's completely amateur in our country. So I've worked across 4 Olympic Games supporting teams, and most of them, by the time they get to the games, they're kind of broke. Yeah. So we are cheering every 4 years or 2 years, depending on whether it's winter or summer, for the young, most vibrant humans on the planet representing our country, and they don't have any money. They're broke.
Amazing.
And so and that's not the case internationally.
No.
And so it is.
But it's only the case for that in America for certain sports, right?
Well, we need to take basketball off the table.
Is that the only Olympic sport where America has professionals?
Basketball, probably hockey. I think soccer, but I don't know. Soccer's not in the Olympic Games.
Yeah, so. Just give you under 23. They've generally gone to a more of a professional title. But you're right. We do not subsidize the training of our athletes. A little bit with stipends, a little bit, but it's really, really hard.
Yeah, it's a hard go.
They're just surviving off endorsement dollars, right?
That's exactly. And in some sports, like whatever the winnings and the prizes are, but it's not enough to keep you alive. So it's mostly endorsements. And the challenge for these athletes is that they're only interested in 3.5 years, out of a quad. So every 3.5 years they're relevant. And so it's really quite
tough. That's interesting.
Tricky. Yeah.
And that impacts the access question too. So when you look at the winter sports, which are overwhelmingly dominated by white athletes who are from upper income families, it's in part because like lower income kids can't afford these sports or the training that goes into it. So we end up pushing aside a lot of kids in a lot of sports now because they just simply can't afford the training, certainly the training to become an Olympian and represent your country. And
where the Nordic countries have that solved because there's a right to be able to access whatever the sport is of their choice.
Well, what's interesting about the Nordic countries, or at least Norway, is within the Children's Bill of Rights in sports, it's not just sort of like a statement. They have policy that backs it. So I know this will sound like a completely wild idea, But there are no national championships before the age of 14. There are no regional championships before the age of 11. And they do that so that these parents and these clubs don't try to create little super teams to win national championships at 8 and 10 and 12, which structurally pushes aside, kids from homes.
Right. And again, not to get overly political, there's no way that would fly in America, right? In a capitalist society, the idea that you can't go into the open market and create a tournament, a volleyball tournament, a baseball perfect game, whatever it is, that you can't operate a free business that people can choose voluntarily whether they enter their tournament. You would never be able to outlaw any of that.
Yeah, you got to be.
You got to have certain parameters as far as what your government is allowed and not allowed to do in order to pull something like that off.
We need to create a youth-centered sport ecosystem that serves all and reflects Americans' appreciation of sport. Because I think most Americans would tell you, yeah, every kid should have an opportunity to play sport.
Wait, let me interrupt. Unless your kid is in the bottom third, right. You probably know this data. If your kid is in the bottom third, let's say it's school, right. Okay, not a club or not a high-level team. If they're in the bottom third of sport and they're forced to play, it's really hard for kids in the U.S. Bullying, self-esteem, low confidence. It's really hard for those kids.
Yeah.
So I interrupt you for a specific reason to say, like, I'm not sure everybody that has been bullied through their experience, I'm not sure anybody that has been bullied as a kid because of the way that their body felt or the way what they couldn't do in sport because they're just bad at it,
right.
That they would say everybody should be in sport.
This episode of You Think is brought to you by Players Health, a company that believes youth athletes deserve the safest and the most accessible environments possible to play the sports they love. To break this down, I spoke with Tyree Burks, Players Health's founder and CEO, to hear the mission and principles of Players Health firsthand. We have a really special guest, the founder of Players Health, Tyree Burks. Tyree, thanks for joining us here on You Think. I'd love to just hear a little bit about your background, a little bit about starting and founding of Players Health, and really just why you saw a hole in the youth sports kind of world that you thought needed to be filled, and it is being filled by your work with your team at Players Health.
My background and where I grew up, the environment that I grew up in played a huge part of me creating Players Health. I grew up in the south side of Chicago. Sports truly saved my life. And when I say that, like, I had an opportunity to choose two paths. Either it was the streets or sports. And fortunately enough, I chose sports. I was invited to come out to a youth football practice. I showed up early and I stayed late. And it kept me out of the streets. And so there's been two things that I've been obsessed with, the past, call it 15 years of my, professional career, as I've been focused on safety and I've been focused on sports. Like, I've just been obsessed with those things. I know what it feels like to grow up in an environment where safety is a luxury, and sports was a safe place for me. Through that experience, I had all these injuries growing up. I got 3 bulging discs in my neck. I ended up tearing my hamstrings, broken fingers, ligaments. Just playing sports and playing football. We didn't have athletic trainers growing up with the school I went to. And then until I went to the college level, I really didn't understand policies and protocols around how these things were managed. And so when I look back over my career, I ended up playing in the Canadian Football League for a couple years, and I decided to hang it up. I started to reflect on my career and go, hey, half these injuries would have been managed a lot better when I was younger. Like, who knows what would have happened, but maybe I would have played a lot longer. And so I started to look at the impact that I wanted to make in my life and also in the world. And sports was played a huge role in my life. So I wanted to give back to it. And Players Health was my way of going about doing that. And so our mission has been the same mission since day one, which is how do we create the safest environment for an athlete to play the sport that they love? I think this is something that the world needs for our youth. And so we've been focused on leaning into creating those safe spaces.
Here at You Think, we want to bring value to you, the parents, coaches, the athletes listening, in everything that we do. Check out Players Health today and let them know Youth Inc. sent you. Now, back to the episode. With all that being said, all right, so now, okay, you said your big transition now is getting to not only identifying the problem, and you did a great job kind of laying out those points, and it's actually very fascinating to hear it broken down. What's your message to the parents, right? So that at the end of the day, the parents control the journey, especially up to a certain age. Before the kids have the autonomy to start making their own decisions, call it high school age. Anything below that, this is a parent-driven journey. What is the message to the parents to try to help kind of recorrect this and kind of bring things back to reality a little bit, as you said, as it's gotten so commercialized, so privatized, and kind of off the rails?
Yeah. I don't spend a whole lot of time in my work blaming parents. Are there crazy parents? Absolutely. Nut job parents? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen them, you know. But I come at it from the perspective of most parents. They love their kids and they want the best for their kids. Yep. And they're just responding to what's given to them. And they don't know how to make educated decisions for their kids. They don't know what quality athletic development looks like. They don't. Your kids are so lucky. You know what kind of influences they need to have at 6 and 8 and 10 and 12. I mean, you're the very best agent for your kids, but a lot of kids don't have that. Their parents are just guessing. And so they're presented with this model of more, travel, spend, just to kind of keep your kid in the system. And so it's hard. It's really, let's acknowledge that it's really, really hard.
I think it's,
and that parents alone can't do this.
For me too.
It's hard for me. It's why I started You Think 2 years ago.
Yeah. So I'm not removed from that challenge.
Neither am I.
And I've been in pro sport for 25 years and you've been in it your whole life.
I don't have a lot of the answers.
Yeah. So this, I really appreciate that you brought that up because it's very muddled and I can't imagine with everything that I do know about what it takes to invest to be your very best.
Yeah.
And I'm still like, this isn't right. But there's like, I'll see behaviors from coaches and other parents. And I know that it's off center, but it's like, there's an inertia there that it's like,
what are you gonna do, man? You know, like I have all the work I've done on this thing. I've had 3 kids come through the system, right? First one played college soccer at Babson, you know, worked out pretty well, but he also came out of college soccer with a lot of injuries. Second one didn't really play travel sports and her body's in the best shape right now. You know, she's 25, 26 years old, hikes all the time. And my third one played soccer just like his big brother did. And he came out of high school with 3 ACL injuries on the same knee. And so he is done with cutting and pivoting sports the rest of his life, which makes me very sad because much of my adult life has been playing basketball, squash, play a lot of beach volleyball right now, tennis. Like the idea that he can't do that for the next 40 years makes me sad. And yet everything I know, I couldn't navigate him to age 18 in a way that avoided that. And that's in part because the coaches, I'm not blaming the coaches, but the coaches don't know about knee injury prevention techniques. They don't know how to handle when a kid does get an injury. The clubs are not being held to best practice standards by the organizations that they're signed up with. So a lot of this stuff is beyond really the control of parents, and all you can do is just educate yourself in quality athletic development. Educate yourself and talk to your child. Talk to your child. What do you want? What do you want to play? What does a good experience look like to you? Is there, you know what I mean? You design from your home out and just keep the end in mind that it's not a really about professional sports or even college sports. It's about having a kid, you know, develop the human skills and, the social skills and the mental health and the physical health and the desire to be active the rest of her life, really keeping that forefront and understanding that's the ROI, not the scholarship.
Great insight.
It's super interesting. And the fact, I think what you brought up is super interesting because I think there is an element where I think there's a lot of parents, and at times I probably throw myself into this bucket. I think there's a lot of parents that don't necessarily want to take the path they're taking, but they look around and they see no reasonable alternative and they say, I don't love it. I don't love specialization. I don't love traveling out of town every weekend, but my kid loves playing this sport. There's no real other opportunity to do it at the level. So there's like a keeping up with the Joneses effect, right? And then it kind of snowballs. It's okay, your kid wants to play on this team. The expectation, if you're going to be on this team, you better be good. So what do you do on your off days? You go get private coaching. You do private workouts and private lessons, because if you don't, you can't be on that team. And then, so it just keeps snowballing and snowballing. I think if you ask parents, pause, are you doing this because you feel like you have no other alternative? Or are you doing this because you really in your heart think this is the best path? I think their answer, if they're being honest, was, we don't want to do this, but we don't know what else to do. Yeah. Everyone else is doing it, so we're just doing what they're doing.
100%. Yeah, you're afraid
and you don't know who the one's starting it.
I don't want to fall behind.
You don't want to. Everyone's fearful their kids falling behind. And if you find out your neighbors down the street are doing 3 days a week of private shooting practices, and they made the top team in travel basketball, okay, it looks like that's the path to making that basketball team. My kid says he wants to make it. We're going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to, but I will.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the bullet train. You feel like the bullet train is leaving the station at age 8, and you're either going to put your kid on it, or they're going to miss out on all the benefits that sports can
And I think
provide.
most people recognize that if you are a Little League pitcher into the World Series Little League pitcher, that means something. And what we understand is that what that means is that you are a youth great kid. You're a great pitcher as a kid.
Correct.
It does not mean you're going to make it to the pros.
If elite 12-year-olds meant elite athletes, every kid in the Little League World Series, every kid who was the dominant 7th grade football player, that the NFL would. Now, Adrian Peterson was a dominant 7th grade football player. He was a dominant 12th grade football player, and there's always the exceptions. LeBron James. For 99.9% of the families, those are not the paths that you're even remotely trying to simulate. That does not apply to anyone's kid. That you can almost like carte blanche say that across the board. For the amount of people who that path applies to, it's not even worth even really considering that.
And that's why I'm grateful to you, Greg. I don't want to go too hard down this path, but you deserve a lot of credit, because former athletes have incredible credibility. When you talk about the value of multi-sport play, or you don't have to specialize early, or here's what you want from your coaches, you have a voice that no one else does. Parents will listen to athletes like you. So my thought is how do we basically clone you and package this stuff in a way that parents get it from all angles, and so they know what to ask of their local program. Hey, coaches, what are you trained? Are you trained in this, and this? Hey, do you multi-sport play? Do you support my kid at age 10 playing multiple? I think athletes can play a huge role.
I agree. Double down on that. There's not a critical mass at this point of a former elite athletes saying what you're suggesting. And my experience with youth coaches is they tend to say the right thing, but then their actions are very different. So, the system is supporting a single sport at this point, which makes it really tricky.
Yeah.
And then there's the mental health side of things, right? Do you have any data that is interesting to you about mental health in sports that you pay attention?
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head. I don't have the numbers, but the research is clear that kids who move their body do better in terms of mental health. The brain works better if you're moving your body than you are sitting and you're inert. If you're moving your body and you're doing it with other people, now you get the social benefits. And so you deal with the social isolation and some of the problems we see in our society right now. So all this talk about how we're going to address the mental health crisis. Oh, and by the way, you know what happens when kids are playing sports? They're not holding a phone. You actually take it out of their hand.
We've talked about this a lot today. I never have to remind my kids to play video games.
Right? So if you want to address the mental health crisis in this country, my thought is can we have some huge national call to action around making sport accessible to every kid who wants to play?
Well, it's interesting. Both of our kids at schools, they don't have, they just eliminate cell phones on campus.
Yep.
Boom.
For the entire day. No. That is a massive gift, I think, to all of us.
100%.
I'd love to see that nationwide. That is a really cool movement. And then at high school, so club and high school are different. At my son's high school, they encourage, you have to take a sport every year. They encourage multiple sports. But then you get into the club system, which is a fast track to nowhere, the bottom. Maybe not, I don't know. But those philosophies differ.
Yeah. I think the key to all sport achievement, the kids who improve the longest, not the fastest, not the most severe, the kids who just continue to creep up in perpetuity, just forever.
I love the frame.
They win.
When you think about if we wanted to build a tall, sturdy structure, we'd have a really wide base. This is an engineering principle that's been around forever.
Yeah.
And when you play multiple sports, you're building a base.
Yeah.
You're not over conditioning one grooved set of muscles. You're also adding psychologically lots of interesting reference points and experiences, different cultures, different standards and expectations, different sophistications. There's something for the parent who's listening right now. This is before we get into formalized sport. Okay. So that the younger ages, there's two things that you can do if you want to help somebody get better at something. It's called formal instruction or guided discovery. Formal instruction is, let's say that I'm going to teach your kid, Greg, how to roll down a hill. Okay, put your chin to your chest, tuck your head, and then look at your belly button, kind of arch over, and then roll. Okay, good. Do that again. Okay, come up here. Let's do it again. Now this time, keep your arms in and roll. Okay, so formal instruction. They will get better faster. Okay, but they're missing the guided discovery. And so the guided discovery is you offer a suggestion to somebody and you say, hey, let's roll down this. You go first. Now, this is not supposed to be a dangerous thing, but sometimes it is, okay? And then what's gonna happen to that kid, they're gonna roll sideways. They're gonna roll on an angle. They're gonna roll backwards. They're gonna try all these different dimensions, which in return creates a bigger base of reference points, a bigger base of internal trust. You're getting so many different like sensory information from that, but that kid takes longer to get good, but they'll stay longer because they have all the reference points. And what do we do in the US? For sure, flat out, I'm gonna use the race to the bottom one more time, formal instruction over and over and over again until they burn out or blow out. So that's the scenario that if there's one little thing that the parent can hear here or the youth coach is encourage guided discovery.
100%.
Encourage playing in that unknown space where you figure out and innovate and create something net new, both for your brain and maybe for the industry if you stay in it long enough.
Have you ever read Talent Code?
Oh yeah.
That's exactly what it dives into, like the Brazilians playing
Dan Coyle, right?
Yeah, Dan Coyle. Not soccer, but futsal. Thanks, my soccer aficionado over there, Mikey, off camera. But he dives into exactly that. Like, what is it about these certain hotbeds and what do they do? And he talks about futsal and deep learning and how there's no coach telling these kids. They put them in a small little concentrated environment, a lot of touches, small ball, small field, play, figure it out. And now, more from my conversation with the team at Players Health. What would you say has been probably the most impactful policy that you guys have consulted on, you've been part of the conversation, implementing and kind of outlining? Like, was it the concussion stuff? Is there something else? Like, where is there one conversation and big movement that you guys have been a part of that you feel like has made a significant impact on the youth sports landscape?
Yeah, I'd have to hyper-focus specifically around our abuse prevention policies. And the reason why I gravitate to that, and not that concussions are not a big deal, because they are, but an incident specifically around emotional, physical, sexual abuse within a youth athlete will change their life forever. And so I always like to say that at Players Health, our focus is to make sure that the transaction between an athlete and their sports organization, we want it to be positive. We want them to be depositing good things into kids and not taking things away from them. And so when we look at abuse prevention policies, we recognize that this is a life on the line. And so when we look at how we prepare and credential coaches, we need to make sure that these adults are actually, been credentialed before they come in contact with an athlete. And what are the signs should we be looking for around bad behavior, around communication? What are the things should we be making sure that we understand? And then do we have a reporting mechanism in place so that the athlete has a voice, their parents, all of the folks around that are our eyes and ears? Do they now have a mechanism to communicate that this is happening? And then do we have preventative measures or temporary measures are being put in place to stop the bleeding? If we do find a behavioral issue with a coach or a staff member, have we removed them? Do we have an investigative process in place? Like, all that policy changes everything. And it limits the likelihood that something that will change a life forever from happening. We only want sports to be positive, but we recognize that there are experiences that kids are having that are negatively impacting their lives forever. So I'd say that that's definitely the number one policy. Health, of course, is a big focus, but I think on the safety piece, it can't get bigger than that.
It's a shame how much is going on in the world of youth sports, but people like yourself that are passionate and companies like Players Health that are very passionate about improving the experience for all people, adults, but mostly children in youth sports. My hats off to you, man. What you guys are building, the services and the policies you guys are implementing and creating are changing the landscape of youth sports for thousands of kids all across the country, and you guys should be applauded for it. So I appreciate you joining us here on You Think. I appreciate you sharing your vision, your journey, and look forward to continuing to work with you guys going forward.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, Greg. Talk to you soon.
Here at You Think, we want to bring value to you, the parents, coaches, the athletes listening, in everything that we do. Check out Players Health today and let them know Youth Inc. sent you. Now, back to the episode.
Tom, I think you'll really appreciate this, is that I didn't fit in traditional stick and ball sport. As a young kid, I didn't understand these man-made rules and these adults screaming at me. I didn't get it. I thought you guys were whack. And I found action sports. And in action sports, surfing, skateboarding, motocross, there's really no rules other than what Mother Nature will demand of you. So, and there's no formal coaching, and it takes a long time to get good at those sports because it's not a repetitive environment. I'll tell you what, I learned so much about how to trust myself, how to stand in my own self, how to face down and give an assessment of risk.
100%.
And when we got these adults, I asked my son the other day, hey, how are we doing, my wife and I, how are we doing like helicopter parenting? You know, like my wife is second generation, so there's a little bit more hovering, you know, our family's an immigrant. And he said, you guys are not helicopters, but I can hear the drone. That's good. Right? I'm like,
that's a good way to put it. I'll take a drone.
I'll take a drone right now. Right?
Yeah. Take a drone. I'll take that.
Yeah. So anyways, I'm having fun with it. But the point is for the listener or viewer, like, encourage environments where they're taking risks and they're doing it in the safest possible way, but things can go wrong.
Yeah.
And when they learn how to work within themselves, it's a lifelong lesson well.
The name of my book, I deliberately named it, is Game On, the All-American Race to Make Champions of Our Children. And what I was trying to do is be ironic and say, you actually can't make a champion. You can't manufacture an elite athlete. They come out with good clay, and from there, you can just not screw it up, but you can put them with good coaches, and you can put them in environments where they can problem solve. Mm-hmm. And that's what you were doing. You were learning to be a problem solver. And isn't that what we want with all of our kids? Yeah. We want our kids to be in an uncertain environment and not have someone tell them how to solve a problem. For them to read, react, and come up with a solution. So how do we get more kids to have your kind of experience?
Well, that, and I'll add a little bit more nuanced piece here. By the age of 15, I probably almost drowned 10 times. So like there's real danger in those types of environments. So you can't manufacture the type of risk I'm talking about. And we're so afraid of that. Like, my parents didn't want me to die, of course, but they wanted me to be a fully formed human and go for it. And I was the kid that was always zigging when the world was zagging. I didn't want to be coached by these adults that were screaming. Like, that's about you. Yeah, this is not about me. I'm going to a place where it can be about me. And so I'm not encouraging danger, but to a point.
He's on record.
Kids don't look.
Michael Gervais, I'm not encouraging danger. That's going to be his new saying.
Yeah. The thing is, parents need to understand they don't own the lives of their children. Their children, they have their own lives. Yeah. You know, and so how do you strike that balance of letting them have enough risk? You'll never hear me say bubble wrap kids, avoid every safety. Every safety. You gotta manage this stuff.
Are you guys okay if your kids came home with a broken bone?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it depends what they did.
Fell out of a tree. Oh, you don't like that one?
Well, I wouldn't love them getting hurt right before a football game. He climbed a tree.
Yeah, but there's a response we have. I think there's a case to be made for broken bones.
Yeah.
And it sounds like I'm callous here.
Not joking.
You're not joking. No, you're serious.
I tell my kids after every football practice, be careful tomorrow in PE. Do not get hurt.
Oh my God. Okay. How about you encourage them, like, get after it, have a blast. Because when they're really getting after it, they're more likely to be focused and not hesitating. It's the hesitation that gets us hurt.
Yeah. Lean into it. Lean into the turn.
I said, don't get hurt. We got 7 more games.
Oh my God. There's a truth in that too. There is a truth.
Just being honest.
Yeah, it's cool.
Well, this was awesome. Tom, appreciate you, man. Our conversations, I feel like we cover a lot of ground every time we chat.
We do, and I appreciate you, Greg.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. Well done, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode with Tom Farrey. Now, let's cover the key takeaways from our conversation. Tom shared his insights on how our youth sports environment stacks up against other countries and how the United States lacks in youth participation rates and accessibility. We also discussed the commercialization of sport in the US and ways we can work to fix its problems. Finally, we covered the immense benefits that staying active has on mental health and the importance of youth involvement in sport. Thanks as always for listening. We'll catch you again soon right here on Youth Inc.